This season on Backyard Farmer, we've talked about the proper placement, planting, and selection of trees. And now that we have a young tree in the ground, we've invested several $100s into the purchase and planting of that tree, and it's an important investment. So the next step that we want to do is talk about the proper care of that young tree. And we can do that through TLC, tending, loosening any of the ties of that tree, and cultivating a good growing situation or conditions for this tree. The first step in TLC is the tending. Tending to make sure that that tree has the best and most proper environment to maximize your growth and vigor for this tree. The first question people often ask is, how much water does that tree need? And it's very important to make sure newly planted trees that you're establishing in your landscape are getting enough water. And this spring we fortunately had enough moisture, but on average you might need to give upwards of 10 gallons of water to a newly planted tree per week. We have a good circle established of mulch that's 3 to 4 inches, and that mulch is going to be very important in keeping the soil temperature moderated, good soil water conditions, but most importantly it's going to keep the weed whackers and lawnmowers away from this tree. And this young tree has bark that's very easily injured, and so we're providing not only good growing conditions but a ring of protection around this tree. Maintaining the mulch circle around this tree is very important, not only right after planting, but for at least 3 to 5 years after planting. Make sure there's 3 to 4 inches of mulch around the base of that tree, and keep the mulch back away directly from right around the tree, down here at the base where the roots and stem meet. And as this grass begins to encroach on the mulch, come back in periodically with herbicide following the label directions, and apply something such as Roundup to keep the grass down and away from invading your mulch. The second portion of TLC, the L, or the loosening of any ties or staking material that are holding that tree in the ground from establishment and planting, should be loosened and checked during that first season of planting. This tree doesn't have any ties or guying material, but if yours does, you want to go ahead and make sure and check to make sure they're not loose and rubbing against the bark, because you can actually girdle the tree and kill that tree from the ties being too tight. The third portion of the TLC is the C, or the cultivation of that tree, cultivating to maximize the growth and vigor, not only through mulching, but proper watering and proper fertilization if it's necessary. Watering is very important that first year if we're not getting adequate moisture. In the spring we typically do, but throughout the summer months, adequate water and supplemental water may be necessary. Roughly 10 gallons a week on most sites per tree is usually enough. In terms of fertilization, you want to be very careful. Unless you've done a soil test and identified some deficient nutrients, fertilization is typically not necessary. And if you do fertilize, you can often cause more harm than good, so be very, very careful with that aspect. Another aspect of cultivation that you want to be wary of is maintaining all the branch structure on this tree. There's a tendency for people to want to prune unnecessarily on trees the first couple years. And these branches are the food source for that tree that are going to help that tree establish for the long run. And you want to maintain as much branch structure and leaves as possible. The only issues or chances where you might need to prune is if a branch has been broken, or has some significant insect and disease problems, or is rubbing and causing some structural problems. But other than that, just leave that canopy alone and let that tree provide its own food. Some of the more common mistakes that we see with tree establishment in the landscape include overwatering. More trees are killed each year with too much water and not enough. Improper fertilization. If you don't need to fertilize, don't do it. And pruning too soon. So keep away from those 3 things. As we've talked about with TLC, the tending of trees, providing good growing conditions, loosening of ties if your tree is staked in, and good cultivation, you're going to maximize the plant health and vigor for this established tree for the long run.